The first key principle in making a man feel your absence deeply is maintaining independence. Independence is not merely being physically separate or occupied with external activities. It is a mindset and a lifestyle that communicates self-sufficiency, confidence, and intrinsic value. When a man sees that your life energy and happiness are not dependent on his attention or validation, he begins to register the magnitude of what he cannot control or automatically access. Independence creates a subtle yet powerful psychological effect because it positions you as someone whose presence is a privilege rather than a given. When he notices that your attention is not freely available, the mind naturally begins to reflect on the significance of the connection and the gap created by your absence. That reflection drives persistent thought and mental focus, ensuring that your presence is felt even when you are not physically there. True independence involves fully engaging with your own life. Pursue your passions, invest in personal growth, spend time with friends and family, and prioritize your goals. When you demonstrate that your fulfillment does not rely on him, he is forced to consider the difference between dependence and autonomy. Observing someone thriving independently triggers recognition of value because humans are wired to appreciate rarity, competence, and emotional stability. Independence signals that your energy and attention are intentional, not automatic, which elevates your significance in his mind. The more complete and vibrant your life appears without his constant involvement, the more your absence is felt as meaningful and impactful. Independence also communicates self-respect. When you set boundaries, honor your priorities, and act in alignment with your own values, you convey that your time, energy, and emotional resources are finite and deserve recognition. That self-respect is compelling because it demonstrates a standard of engagement that cannot be assumed or taken for granted. A man begins to think about you constantly because your independence highlights the effort, attention, and intention required to be part of your life. He registers that your connection is not passive or effortless, and that awareness increases reflection, mental engagement, and appreciation. Another critical aspect of independence is the consistency with which it is maintained. Independence must be genuine, not performative or reactive. When you live your life fully, consistently demonstrate self-sufficiency, and remain focused on your goals, your absence is anchored in authenticity. The mind responds strongly to consistent patterns that indicate reliability, strength, and competence. By remaining steady in your independence, you establish a psychological framework in which your absence is interpreted not as disinterest, but as a natural consequence of your purposeful life. That framework reinforces the significance of your presence and ensures that thoughts of you are persistent. Independence also creates a space for introspection and reflection. When he notices that you do not constantly seek engagement or validation, he begins to replay past interactions and consider the moments of connection that were meaningful. That space allows him to recognize the impact of your energy, presence, and attention in ways that proximity alone cannot generate. Absence amplified by independence forces cognitive and emotional evaluation. He measures what was valuable, what he may have taken for granted, and what it would take to regain meaningful engagement. Mental loops are created as he considers how your life, composure, and priorities intersect with his own behavior, decisions, and intentions. Independence also strengthens perceived value. Humans are wired to prioritize what is rare, desirable, and intentional. When a man realizes that your attention is not guaranteed, that your engagement is selective, and that your life is vibrant on its own, he naturally attributes greater worth to your presence. That perception drives thought because the brain instinctively evaluates scarcity, significance, and reward. The combination of independence, consistency, and purposeful engagement ensures that your absence is not merely noticed but deeply felt. Emotional independence enhances mental reflection because it communicates stability and composure. When your mood, energy, and focus are not contingent on his attention or approval, he becomes aware that your value is intrinsic and not subject to fluctuation based on his actions. That awareness encourages repeated mental engagement because he recognizes the rarity of someone who maintains self-worth and emotional equilibrium. Independence creates both admiration and reflection. He is drawn to your presence and simultaneously compelled to consider the consequences of losing access to it. Ultimately, maintaining independence ensures that your absence is meaningful and impactful. By fully engaging with your life, consistently honoring your priorities, setting boundaries, and demonstrating emotional and personal self-sufficiency, you create a psychological effect that cannot be ignored. He thinks about you constantly because your presence is no longer assumed, your attention is intentional, and your energy represents value that cannot be replicated or taken for granted. Independence transforms absence from a simple lack of proximity into a powerful statement of worth, significance, and magnetic influence, making your presence profoundly felt even when you are not there. The second key principle in making a man feel your absence deeply is the power of composure. Composure is the ability to maintain emotional stability, calmness, and confidence regardless of external circumstances. and it is one of the most compelling forces in creating presence through absence. When you step back intentionally, not out of anger or manipulation, but with steadiness and self-assurance, you send a clear message that your energy, attention, and emotional investment are valuable and intentional. A man cannot help but notice the difference between a presence that is dependent and reactive and one that is controlled, confident, and unshakable. Composure communicates strength without words, and it ensures that your absence is not perceived as neediness or insecurity, but as a natural reflection of your self-respect and inner power. Emotional composure is powerful because it creates contrast. Humans are wired to respond to change, difference, and patterns that deviate from expectation. When a man is accustomed to engagement, warmth, or attention, and then experiences distance paired with calmness, it forces reflection. He notices the absence because it is not accompanied by drama, pleading, or emotional volatility. That contrast triggers cognitive loops where he evaluates past interactions, considers your impact, and recognizes the stability you embody. He begins to realize that your presence is rare, valuable, and not guaranteed, which amplifies thought and reflection. Composure also enhances perceived value when your attention is not automatically available, when your energy is reserved for meaningful engagement. And when your emotional responses are controlled, he becomes aware that connection with you requires intentionality. This awareness activates mental reflection because humans are naturally drawn to what is rare, significant, and non-automatic. Your calm and composed absence signals that your presence is a privilege, not a right, which encourages him to evaluate your worth and the emotional impact you have had in his life. He thinks about you constantly because the mind is drawn to patterns of significance, and composure ensures that absence is interpreted as valuable rather than punitive. Another aspect of composure is the demonstration of emotional resilience. By showing that you can navigate life, relationships, and interactions without being dependent on his attention or approval, you reveal inner strength and self-sufficiency. Emotional resilience communicates that your energy cannot be swayed by attempts to manipulate or demand attention. This recognition forces him to consider the consequences of his own behavior and the rarity of someone who maintains balance while still fostering meaningful connection. The mental loops created by this reflection intensify because he must reconcile desire with the reality of your steadfastness and independence. Composure also allows for intentional distance without alienation. When absence is paired with calmness, it does not feel like punishment or rejection. It feels measured, deliberate, and confident. That perception ensures that he reflects on the moments of connection he experienced and the energy you invested rather than becoming defensive or resentful. By stepping back with grace, you highlight the value of your presence without diminishing it, creating a powerful effect that keeps him mentally engaged. Absence combined with composure transforms space into a mechanism for awareness, reflection, and recognition of your significance. Consistency and composure further strengthens this effect. The more consistently you maintain your emotional stability and calm detachment, the more your absence becomes a force rather than a momentary gap. Consistency reassures him that your energy is deliberate, your attention is meaningful, and your presence is significant. Repeated exposure to this pattern reinforces the psychological impact as he begins to internalize the understanding that your presence is both rare and influential. That consistency generates persistent mental reflection because he recognizes the steady value of what he cannot always access. Composure also interacts with emotional contrast to create cognitive engagement. When he experiences moments of warmth, attention, or connection followed by your calm absence, the juxtaposition reinforces the significance of your energy. Emotional highs followed by stable, composed distance stimulate thought, reflection, and appreciation. Your presence is remembered and mentally replayed not simply because of proximity, but because of the emotional resonance and composure you embody. The mind registers the contrast, creating an ongoing loop of awareness and evaluation. Finally, composure communicates dignity. When your absence is paired with grace, confidence, and inner stability, it signals that you do not tolerate chaos or disrespect. Your dignity becomes a silent statement of value that cannot be ignored, forcing him to reflect on the consequences of taking your presence for granted. Composure ensures that absence is impactful without manipulation, that space is felt without tension, and that your significance is recognized without overt demands. Ultimately, composure magnifies the effect of absence because it combines calm, confidence, and intentionality with emotional stability. By stepping back with grace, maintaining steadiness, and prioritizing self-respect, you ensure that your absence is meaningful, impactful, and psychologically compelling. He thinks about you constantly because composure transforms distance into reflection, admiration, and recognition, leaving a lasting imprint that cannot be dismissed. The third key principle in making a man feel your absence deeply is emotional contrast. Emotional contrast occurs when moments of engagement, warmth, and connection are paired with intentional space, creating a dynamic that the mind cannot ignore. Humans are wired to notice differences, to respond to shifts in energy, and to remember experiences that deviate from routine. When a man experiences your presence as meaningful, attentive, and emotionally resonant, followed by periods where you maintain boundaries, independence, or distance, his brain naturally engages in reflection. That reflection becomes a mental loop where he replays interactions, evaluates emotional impact, and recognizes the significance of your presence, making your absence profoundly felt. Emotional contrast works because it highlights the value of what was experienced. When interactions are predictable or constant, attention diminishes and the mind grows accustomed to presence. By introducing shifts without drama, manipulation, or withdrawal motivated by insecurity, you create a subtle tension that is both stimulating and memorable. When he notices the difference between your engagement and your absence, he begins to assess the qualities that make your presence impactful. That assessment is not superficial, it engages both cognition and emotion. He considers the warmth, attention, understanding, and energy you bring, and the absence allows him to recognize what he cannot take for granted. Emotional contrast transforms the mind's perception of value from passive awareness to active reflection. Another element of emotional contrast is the balance between approachability and intentional distance. When he experiences moments of connection, laughter, or deep conversation with you, followed by periods where you are self-directed, composed, and focused on your own priorities, it creates a rhythm that engages the mind. That rhythm stimulates desire and reflection because it alternates between reward and challenge. The human brain is drawn to patterns of significance that require attention and effort, and emotional contrast creates precisely that pattern. He begins to replay moments in thought, analyze your energy, and imagine what it would take to regain access to the emotional resonance he values. Emotional contrast is enhanced by subtlety. It is not necessary to be overt or dramatic. Even small shifts in tone, focus, or engagement can create a profound effect. A meaningful glance, a thoughtful response, or a shared laugh followed by composed independence registers in memory and leaves a mental imprint. The brain naturally associates emotional highs with significance and juxtaposes them with absence, which amplifies impact. By creating a pattern of contrast, you ensure that he is mentally engaged even when you are not physically present. Your energy lingers in thought because it is emotionally stimulating, memorable, and meaningful. Consistency strengthens the power of emotional contrast. When your presence is reliably impactful and your absence is consistently intentional, he internalizes the pattern. He recognizes that your attention is deliberate and your energy is valuable, and that engaging with you requires effort and respect. That recognition leads to repeated mental engagement as he reflects on the moments of connection and contrasts them with your absence. Over time, this process embeds you in his mind because the combination of emotional highs and intentional distance creates both admiration and longing. Emotional contrast also fosters introspection. When he experiences the effect of your absence after meaningful connection, he evaluates his own behavior, choices, and priorities in relation to you. He notices the difference between moments of engagement and moments of absence, and that awareness stimulates reflection on your value. The mind dwells on patterns that are emotionally significant, and contrast ensures that your presence is not just remembered superficially, but analyzed and appreciated at a deeper level. Another dimension of emotional contrast is the amplification of emotional memory. Moments of connection become more vivid when they are followed by absence because the mind naturally emphasizes what is meaningful yet not constantly accessible. That emphasis ensures that you are not simply recalled, you are felt, reflected upon, and mentally revisited. Emotional contrast creates depth in memory because it engages both the cognitive recognition of significance and the emotional response to reward and scarcity. Finally, emotional contrast communicates worth and boundaries without words. By alternating engagement with composed absence, you demonstrate that your attention is valuable, your energy is finite, and your presence is not to be taken for granted. That silent communication magnifies the psychological and emotional impact of absence, making him think about you constantly. He becomes aware of your influence, reflects on past interactions, and experiences a magnetic pull toward the moments when your presence created meaning, warmth, and resonance. Ultimately, emotional contrast is a psychological force that makes absence impactful. By pairing meaningful engagement with intentional distance, balancing warmth with independence, and creating patterns that stimulate reflection, you ensure that your absence is not empty but compelling. Your presence lingers in thought, your significance is recognized, and your energy occupies mental and emotional space in ways that are unforgettable. Emotional contrast transforms distance into reflection, desire, and lasting admiration, leaving a permanent imprint that cannot be ignored. The fourth key principle in making a man feel your absence deeply is the power of intentional scarcity. Scarcity is not about playing games or withholding affection arbitrarily. It is about creating an environment where your attention, energy, and presence are recognized as valuable, rare, and meaningful. When a man realizes that your time and engagement are not automatically available, he begins to evaluate what your presence truly brings to his life. Scarcity activates the human brain's natural response to value, desire, and reward. The less readily something is available, the more the mind focuses on it, analyzes it, and reflects on its significance. By being intentionally selective with your availability, you ensure that he begins to notice the importance of your presence and the weight of what he is missing. Intentional scarcity works because it highlights the difference between what is ordinary and what is extraordinary. When someone is constantly present, their energy can become normalized and the value of their attention is often underestimated. But when your engagement is meaningful and not taken for granted, he is forced to consider the significance of the moments you share. Each interaction becomes memorable because it is earned, not assumed, and that memory creates mental loops where he replays moments, reflects on feelings, and considers the impact of losing access to your presence. Scarcity transforms absence from a simple lack of proximity into a powerful psychological force that commands reflection and awareness. Another dimension of scarcity is its ability to foster appreciation and introspection. When he cannot automatically access your attention, he begins to reflect on past interactions, noticing the emotional energy, warmth, or support you provided. Scarcity magnifies these moments because they are no longer ubiquitous. They stand out against the backdrop of distance. The mind naturally dwells on experiences that are significant, rare, and emotionally rewarding, which ensures that your absence is felt profoundly. He evaluates the difference between moments of connection and the current space, internalizing your value and the unique qualities you bring to interactions. Scarcity also works in tandem with independence. When you maintain a full, vibrant life that does not rely on his presence or attention, your engagement becomes even more impactful. Independence ensures that your scarcity is authentic, not performative, and that your absence is experienced as a natural reflection of a self-sufficient life rather than as a reaction to behavior. Men are drawn to individuals whose energy is intentional and whose presence is earned. When scarcity is combined with genuine independence, the mind becomes engaged because it recognizes both the effort required to connect and the rarity of the reward. He begins to think about you constantly because your value is both real and not always accessible. Emotional impact is amplified by scarcity. When moments of connection are paired with intentional absence, he experiences both the warmth of engagement and the awareness of what is missing. That contrast stimulates reflection, desire, and mental rehearsal of interactions. The human brain prioritizes emotionally significant experiences, and scarcity ensures that your presence is remembered not only for what was shared, but for the gap left in your absence. Each moment of distance reinforces the importance of the time you have spent together, creating a psychological loop that keeps you present in thought. Consistency enhances the effect of scarcity. When your absence is deliberate and your engagement is meaningful, he begins to internalize the pattern. The brain registers this as intentional, not arbitrary, which increases the impact of both your presence and your absence. He evaluates your value repeatedly because he recognizes that your attention is not freely given and that maintaining connection requires awareness, effort, and respect. That consistent pattern ensures that your absence is not empty but compelling and that your presence remains influential even when you are physically or emotionally distant. Scarcity also communicates boundaries and self-worth without words. By controlling access to your time, energy, and attention, you establish that you are intentional, deliberate, and confident. Boundaries create awareness of value because they force the other person to recognize what is not automatically available. He begins to appreciate the rarity and significance of your presence and reflect on what it would take to maintain meaningful engagement. Scarcity combined with dignity signals strength, authenticity, and self-respect, which is psychologically magnetic. Finally, scarcity makes absence felt on both cognitive and emotional levels. The mind naturally focuses on what is rare, the heart registers the emotional impact of what is missing, and together these forces create a lasting impression. When your attention is intentional, your energy is valuable, and your absence is authentic, he cannot ignore the significance of what he is missing. Scarcity ensures that thoughts of you persist, that reflection occurs, and that your presence continues to occupy both mental and emotional space, even in distance. Ultimately, intentional scarcity transforms absence into a force of awareness, reflection, and desire. By controlling access to your attention, maintaining independence, and creating meaningful interactions, you make your presence deeply significant. Scarcity ensures that your absence is not overlooked, that your value is recognized, and that your energy continues to resonate in his mind and heart, leaving a lasting impression that cannot be dismissed or forgotten. The fifth key principle in making a man feel your absence deeply is demonstrating impact through presence and withdrawal. This principle is rooted in the idea that true significance is understood most clearly when it is contrasted with absence. When you engage meaningfully with him, offering attention, warmth, or connection, and then step back intentionally, you create a mental and emotional impression that lingers far beyond the moment. Humans are wired to notice and evaluate what is rare and meaningful. And the combination of your purposeful presence and deliberate absence ensures that your impact is not just experienced, but reflected upon. When he perceives that your presence is influential and that its absence is noticeable, his mind naturally returns to you repeatedly, analyzing, recalling, and evaluating the significance of what he is missing. Demonstrating impact requires intentionality in every interaction. When you communicate, engage, or share energy, it must be genuine, deliberate, and emotionally resonant. Superficial interactions or inconsistent engagement do not create lasting mental or emotional impressions. By being intentional, you ensure that your presence carries weight and meaning. When he experiences the quality of your energy and recognizes the difference between ordinary interactions and the depth you provide, his mind begins to assign value. That value is reinforced when you withdraw intentionally because the absence highlights what he has come to recognize as significant. The mind evaluates this absence in contrast to the meaningful engagement, creating mental loops of reflection and thought. Withdrawal, when paired with demonstrated impact, communicates that your presence is not guaranteed. It signals that access to your attention, energy, and emotional engagement is intentional and cannot be assumed. Humans naturally respond to rarity and significance, and when your absence is understood in this context, it creates cognitive tension that leads to persistent thought. He begins to replay past interactions, recalling moments where your presence was meaningful, analyzing the effort required to maintain connection, and reflecting on the consequences of taking your energy for granted. That reflection ensures that your absence is deeply felt and that your value is recognized on a lasting level. Impact is reinforced through consistency. When every meaningful interaction is followed by intentional withdrawal, a clear pattern is established that the mind registers as both significant and reliable. The more consistent you are in demonstrating presence and absence intentionally, the stronger the psychological effect. He begins to internalize the pattern, recognizing that engagement with you requires awareness, effort, and this patterning increases the likelihood that he will think about you frequently because the combination of meaningful presence and deliberate absence creates a cognitive and emotional imprint that is difficult to ignore. Another aspect of demonstrating impact through withdrawal is the creation of reflection. Absence creates space for him to process, evaluate, and appreciate the energy, attention, and care you provided. When he has space to reflect on the difference between your engagement and your absence, he becomes more aware of the significance of your presence and the emotional impact it carries. That reflection deepens mental engagement because he is actively considering not only your qualities, but also his behavior, decisions, and responses in relation to you. The psychological pull of reflection strengthens thought loops and ensures that you remain present in his mind even without physical interaction. Impact is also tied to emotional resonance. When your presence evokes meaningful emotions, whether through connection, understanding, or shared experiences, those emotions leave a lasting imprint. Emotional resonance ensures that absence is felt more acutely because the mind and heart are reminded of the depth of what was experienced. The more profound the emotional connection you establish during moments of engagement, the stronger the effect of your withdrawal. His thoughts continue to return to you because the absence amplifies the emotional significance of prior interactions, reinforcing reflection, longing, and awareness. Boundaries enhance the effectiveness of impact through absence. When your engagement is meaningful and your withdrawal is intentional, it communicates that your attention is valuable and that your energy is not unlimited. Setting clear boundaries ensures that your presence is respected and your absence is recognized as purposeful rather than accidental. That awareness heightens cognitive and emotional focus, as he must consider the significance of the attention he does receive and the effort required to maintain connection. Boundaries transform presence and absence into a psychological dynamic that maintains your influence even at a distance. Finally, demonstrating impact through presence and withdrawal ensures that your absence is never empty. It is filled with reflection, emotional recognition, and mental engagement. By combining meaningful interactions with intentional space, you create a rhythm that emphasizes value, significance, and rarity. He thinks about you constantly because your presence is memorable, your energy is influential, and your absence amplifies the recognition of what he stands to lose. This principle ensures that your influence endures beyond immediate interaction, leaving a lasting imprint on his mind and heart that cannot be dismissed. Ultimately, demonstrating impact through presence and withdrawal is a powerful psychological mechanism that makes your absence deeply felt. By engaging intentionally, creating emotional resonance, maintaining consistency, and stepping back with purpose, you transform absence into recognition, reflection, and desire. He becomes aware of your significance, appreciates the value of your attention, and continuously reflects on the depth of your presence, making you unforgettable and profoundly present even when you are not physically there. The sixth key principle in making a man feel your absence deeply is the power of significance combined with intentional distance. Significance is not something declared or demanded, it is something felt, experienced, and internalized. When your presence carries emotional weight, energy, and impact, and then you intentionally step back, your absence becomes a reflection of your true value. The human mind naturally focuses on what is important, rare, and meaningful, and when combined with absence, significance amplifies mental and emotional attention. He begins to notice what he has been missing because the gap left by your absence highlights the weight of your presence, making your influence persist far beyond immediate interaction. Significance works because it communicates that your presence is not ordinary. When every interaction carries meaning, whether through attention, understanding, or emotional resonance, it leaves an imprint in memory. That imprint is strengthened when it is contrasted with absence. The mind is compelled to reflect on what was experienced and what is now missing, evaluating both the rarity of the moments and the value of the connection. When a man realizes that your presence is impactful and that it is not automatically available, he begins to think about you consistently because his brain recognizes the scarcity and emotional weight of what he had or has temporarily lost. Intentional distance magnifies significance. Stepping back with composure, independence, and dignity does not create emotional punishment, it creates awareness. The combination of your impactful presence and deliberate space forces reflection and evaluation. He begins to replay moments, analyze your influence, and recognize the subtle ways your energy shaped interactions. This process engages both cognitive assessment and emotional recognition. Distance provides the opportunity for the mind to internalize value because without absence, significance can be taken for granted. By pairing your meaningful presence with deliberate withdrawal, you ensure that your absence is deeply felt and mentally persistent. Significance is further reinforced by authenticity. When your energy, attention, and emotional engagement are genuine, your absence carries weight because it is grounded in reality rather than manipulation. Authenticity signals that your presence is consistent with your principles, values, and self-respect. When a man recognizes that the impact you create is real and not performative, he naturally reflects on the difference between your presence and his ability to influence it. Authentic significance combined with intentional absence triggers both admiration and longing because it creates a cognitive and emotional impression that cannot be dismissed or replaced. Another critical aspect of significance is the creation of mental loops through reflection. When he experiences the emotional weight of your presence and then encounters your absence, his mind replays interactions, recalls moments of attention and connection, and considers their impact. He evaluates not only what you provided, but also what he may have overlooked or taken for granted. This reflection strengthens the psychological imprint because the absence amplifies the memory and emotional resonance of your prior engagement. Your presence becomes mentally inescapable because it carries a significance that is now highlighted by its temporary unavailability. Boundaries amplify the power of significance. When your engagement is intentional and your distance is deliberate, you communicate that your time, energy, and attention are valuable. Boundaries signal that your presence is not a default state and that connection with you requires respect and effort. He begins to evaluate the difference between access and absence, recognition and oversight, and the rarity of the emotional energy you bring. Boundaries ensure that your significance is not diluted by constant availability, making your absence more impactful and your presence more memorable. Significance also engages emotional and cognitive prioritization. The mind naturally focuses on what is important, and when your presence has created meaningful emotional experiences, your absence triggers repeated thought and reflection. He considers the impact of your energy, the quality of your interactions, and the rarity of your attention. This awareness reinforces desire and contemplation because he experiences both the emotional reward of past connection and the cognitive recognition of what is missing. Your absence becomes a force that stimulates evaluation, longing, and reflection, keeping you consistently present in thought. Finally, significance combined with intentional distance communicates value silently but powerfully without drama, manipulation, or demand. You demonstrate that your energy and attention are finite, meaningful, and intentional. The mind and heart naturally recognize the weight of what is not automatically available. When a man internalizes your impact and experiences the void created by absence, he is compelled to reflect on your worth repeatedly. Your presence and influence become enduring because significance, when paired with deliberate space, ensures that your absence is not empty, but profoundly felt mentally and emotionally. Ultimately, The sixth principle shows that absence becomes a powerful psychological and emotional tool when paired with genuine significance. By creating meaningful interactions, stepping back intentionally, maintaining authenticity, setting boundaries, and fostering reflection, you make your absence deeply felt. He cannot ignore the value of your presence because the gap highlights what is rare, meaningful, and impactful. Significance ensures that your energy resonates long after you are gone, that reflection persists, and that your absence carries weight, making you unforgettable and deeply present even when you are not physically there.